The gleaming halls of the Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences echoed with whispers as Mark walked past. He kept his head down, clutching his data pad close to his chest. Being the only human among 200 alien students wasn't easy, especially when you ranked dead last in every subject. "Look, it's the primitive," a voice buzzed from behind. Mark didn't need to turn around to know it was Rex, the top student whose crystalline body sparkled with barely contained energy. "Still trying to understand basic quantum mechanics with that organic brain of yours." Mark ignored the laughter that followed and hurried to his next class. Advanced Energy Manipulation. The classroom was a massive dome with floating platforms for each student. As he stepped onto his platform, the holographic display came to life, showing his ranking. 200/200ths. Professor Ion, a being made of pure plasma contained within an environmental suit, hovered at the center of the room. Today's exercise: manipulate quantum particles to create a stable micro-universe. Begin. Around Mark, students raised their appendages. Beautiful patterns of energy formed between their limbs. Some created perfect spheres of swirling galaxies, while others crafted intricate webs of space-time. Mark stared at his own trembling hands, trying to remember the formulas. He focused hard, following the textbook steps exactly as written. A small spark appeared between his palms, flickered hopefully, then fizzled out with a sad pop. Several students snickered. "Time's up," Professor Ion announced. "Mark, another failure. I don't understand how you passed the entrance exam." I just need more time to practice," Mark said quietly. "Practice won't help if you can't grasp the basic concepts," Rex called out. Maybe he should go back to studying rocks and sticks on Earth. Mark's face burned with embarrassment. What Rex and others didn't know was that he spent every night studying twice as hard as anyone else. While his alien classmates could directly download information into their enhanced brains, he had to read, take notes, and practice the old-fashioned way. Back in his room, Mark sat at his desk, surrounded by scattered notes and diagrams. His roommate Blue, a crystalline being like Rex, but much kinder, watched him with curious, faceted eyes. "You know," Blue said, "I've noticed something interesting. When the cleaning bot malfunctioned last week, you fixed it in seconds. None of us could figure out what was wrong." Mark shrugged. That was different. It was just a simple pattern of cause and effect. But that's what quantum mechanics is too, isn't it? Just on a different scale. Before Mark could respond, their room's holographic display lit up with the next day's rankings. Mark's name sat firmly at the bottom, as usual. His shoulders slumped. "Maybe they're right," he muttered. "Maybe humans aren't meant for advanced sciences." But as he turned back to his studies, something caught his eye. The failed energy patterns from today's class reminded him of something he'd seen before. He couldn't quite place it, but for a moment, the swirling quantum formulas looked almost familiar. He just didn't know yet that this small observation would change everything. Blue had started keeping a secret log about Mark's behavior. At first, it was just curiosity about his unusual roommate, but now it had turned into something more interesting. While Mark continued to fail at standard tests, Blue noticed patterns that others missed. One morning, as they walked to class, the Academy's artificial gravity flickered. While other students stumbled and fell, Mark automatically adjusted his stance, moving with perfect balance. When Blue asked how he did it, Mark just shrugged. "Growing up on Earth, I played a lot of sports," he said. "Your body learns to adjust to changes. It's nothing special." But Blue noticed it was special. During their quantum computing class, he watched Mark tackle problems differently than everyone else. While the alien students processed problems in straight lines of logic, Mark's approach looked more like a tangled web. "Incorrect again, Mark," Professor Logic announced, their metallic face showing disappointment. "The solution requires exactly 2,347 steps. You used." They paused. "What is this? This isn't even a proper solution path." Yet Blue had seen something fascinating. Although Mark's answer was marked wrong, He had reached a similar result using fewer steps. The professors, programmed to recognize only standard methods, couldn't understand his shortcuts. Later in their room, Blue watched Mark solve a complex puzzle cube that other students used for entertainment. Most took hours to solve it using mathematical formulas. Mark completed it in minutes. "How did you calculate the solution so quickly?" Blue asked. "Calculate?" Mark looked confused. "I didn't calculate anything. I just felt how it should go. Like when you're catching a ball, you don't solve equations about its trajectory. You just know where it will land." Blue's crystalline structure flickered with excitement. "But that's impossible. You can't solve complex spatial problems by feeling them." Yet Mark had done exactly that. Blue began documenting more cases, Mark predicting weather pattern changes before the Academy's supercomputers, instinctively avoiding corridor sections that later malfunctioned, and finding efficient solutions that broke all known rules of problem solving. During one particularly difficult advanced physics lesson, Blue watched Mark doodling in his notebook instead of taking notes. Looking closer, Blue realized the doodles weren't random. They were complex wave patterns matching exactly what Professor Wave was teaching, just represented in a completely different way. "Mark," Blue said that evening, "I have a theory. You're not failing because you don't understand. You're failing because you understand in a way the Academy can't measure." Mark looked up from his studies, dark circles under his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Our tests are designed for minds that process information like computers. But your human brain, it sees patterns and connections we don't. You're not worse at science. You're doing a different kind of science entirely." Mark started to object, but at that moment, the Academy's alert system blared to life. Red lights flashed through the corridors, and a computerized voice announced, "Warning, critical malfunction in quantum core. All students remain in their rooms." Blue watched as Mark's eyes narrowed, seeing that familiar look when his roommate noticed a pattern nobody else could see. Something big was about to happen. Red warning lights continued to flash as the Academy's quantum core destabilized. Through their room's window, Mark and Blue could see streams of energy crackling around the central tower. "All available professors report to the core chamber," the announcement system blared. "This is not a drill." Mark stood up suddenly, his eyes fixed on the erratic energy patterns. "Those pulses, they're not random." "Of course they're random," Blue said. "That's what happens in a quantum core breach. The energy becomes chaotic and unpredictable." But Mark was already grabbing his data pad and heading for the door. Blue's crystalline form flickered with alarm. "Where are you going?" "We're supposed to stay in our rooms." "I've seen this pattern before," Mark said, his voice unusually confident, "in old videos of Earth's ocean waves during a storm." Despite Blue's protests, Mark ran through the empty corridors toward the central tower. Blue, feeling responsible for his roommate, followed close behind. When they reached the core chamber's observation deck, they found a group of professors frantically working at control panels. Professor Ion's plasma form was swirling with stress. "The containment fields are failing. We've tried every standard protocol." Mark stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Professor, the energy isn't chaotic. It's following a pattern like water." "This is no time for your primitive analogies," Rex sneered. He had apparently ignored the stay-in-room order too. "The core operates on quantum principles, not your simple Earth physics." But Mark was already moving to a control panel. His fingers flew across the holographic display, not following any standard procedure. Instead of trying to contain the energy, he began adjusting the fields to move with it. "Stop him," Rex shouted. "He'll kill us all." Professor Ion raised an appendage to intervene, but Blue moved between them. "Wait, look at the readings." The violent energy pulses were beginning to smooth out. Mark continued making adjustments, his movements almost like conducting music. He wasn't fighting the energy, he was working with it, guiding it like a river finding a new path. "Impossible," Professor Logic whispered, their metallic features showing rare emotion. He's stabilizing the core using completely unorthodox methods. Within minutes, the warning lights stopped flashing. The core's energy returned to its normal steady glow, but now flowing in a slightly different pattern than before. How? Professor Ion asked, floating closer to examine the readings. How did you know this would work? Mark wiped sweat from his forehead. Humans studied chaos theory long before we understood quantum mechanics. We learned that sometimes what looks like chaos actually follows hidden patterns. The core wasn't malfunctioning. It was trying to find a more natural flow state. The professors huddled around the control panel, examining Mark's modifications with growing excitement. Even Rex stood silent, his crystalline form dimmed with shock. Blue moved to stand beside Mark. Remember when I said you understand things differently? This is what I meant. Mark nodded slowly, still staring at the now peaceful core. For the first time since coming to the academy, he felt like maybe being different wasn't such a bad thing after all. The quantum core pulsed with its new rhythm, steady and strong, following the pattern that only a human mind had been able to see. The day after the quantum core incident, Mark found himself in the academy's main assessment chamber. Instead of his usual spot at the back of the class, he sat in the center, surrounded by curious professors and scanning equipment. Remarkable, Professor Logic said, studying the holographic displays showing Mark's brain activity. When we present a problem, his neural patterns don't follow any standard learning model. Professor Ion hovered closer, their plasma form rippling with interest. Show us again how you approach a quantum calculation, Mark. Mark closed his eyes, facing the practice problem displayed before him. It showed a complex quantum particle system that needed balancing. Instead of following the textbook method, he let his mind wander, seeing connections that reminded him of things from Earth. The way leaves danced in the wind, how water swirled in a stream, the patterns clouds made before a storm. The scanning equipment lit up with activity. Fascinating, Blue exclaimed from his observation post. His brain creates hundreds of simultaneous connections to stored memories and experiences. It's not linear processing at all. Professor Wave floated forward, their energy form pulsing thoughtfully. All this time, we've been teaching humans wrong. We tried to make them learn like us. Direct, logical, step by step. But their strength lies in seeing connections we can't. Mark opened his eyes as the practice problem resolved itself correctly. He hadn't followed a single proper formula, but the results were perfect. But this makes no sense, Rex protested from the corner where he washed. How can random memories about Earth weather help solve quantum physics? Professor Logic's metallic face shifted into what passed for a smile. Because, Rex, the universe follows similar patterns at all scales. Humans, it seems, are uniquely gifted at recognizing these patterns across different contexts. The professors began reviewing Mark's previous work with new eyes. His failed assignments weren't failures at all. They were creative solutions that their grading systems hadn't been programmed to recognize. Look at this energy manipulation exercise, Blue pointed out, displaying one of Mark's worst-scored tests. He didn't follow the standard steps, but his method actually used less energy while achieving the same result. Professor Ion turned to Mark. We owed you an apology. We were so focused on teaching you our way that we failed to see the value in yours. Human intuition and pattern recognition. It's not primitive at all. It's exactly what we need for the next level of scientific discovery. Mark felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. So, I'm not actually bad at science. Bad at science? Professor Wave laughed, their form shimmering. My boy, you've just shown us a whole new way of doing science. We've been so caught up in our rigid methods that we've missed countless possibilities. As the professors excitedly discussed creating new teaching methods that would work with human cognitive patterns, Mark caught Blue's eye. His roommate's crystalline form was glowing with satisfaction. I told you you were different, Blue said. But I don't think any of us realized just how valuable different could be. Mark smiled, finally feeling like he belonged at the academy. Not because he had learned to be like everyone else, but because everyone else had learned to see the value in being like him. The news of Mark's unique problem-solving ability spread quickly through the academy. While most students were fascinated, Rex was not impressed. During lunch period in the Grand Hall, he approached Mark's table, his crystalline form glowing with barely contained anger. "This has gone on long enough," Rex announced loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "I challenge you to a public competition, human. Let's see how your primitive pattern recognition holds up against real scientific knowledge." The hall fell silent. Even Blue, sitting beside Mark, tensed up. Nobody had ever survived an academic challenge from Rex, the Academy's top student for 3 straight years. "The challenge is accepted," Mark said quietly, surprising everyone. "Name your terms." Rex's crystal facets flickered with satisfaction. 3 problems, increasing difficulty. Solved in front of the entire Academy. Winner takes the top rank. Professor Ion, who had been monitoring the exchange, floated forward. "As this is an official challenge, I will design the problems myself. The competition will be held in the Grand Auditorium tomorrow." The next day, the auditorium was packed. Students and professors filled every seat, eager to watch the confrontation. 2 platforms rose from the center stage, one for Rex and one for Mark. The first problem, Professor Ion announced, is a 4-dimensional energy matrix that needs stabilizing. The holographic display lit up between them. Rex immediately began calculating, his crystalline hands moving in precise, practiced patterns. Mark, however, closed his eyes for a moment, seeing the matrix not as numbers, but as a pattern of forces, like currents in a river. Rex finished first, his solution technically perfect. But when Mark opened his eyes and made a few simple adjustments, his solution achieved the same stability using half the energy. "Impossible," Rex shouted. He didn't even use the proper formulas. The second problem involved quantum entanglement. Again, Rex's approach was textbook perfect, while Mark's solution seemed to break all the rules, yet worked even better. By the third and final problem, Rex was visibly shaking. Professor Ion revealed the challenge, a complex spatial anomaly that needed resolving. It was graduate-level work, something no student should be able to handle. Rex worked furiously, his crystalline form blazing with effort. But after 10 minutes, he stepped back, unable to find a solution. "It's impossible," he declared. "The variables are too chaotic." Mark stepped forward, studying the swirling pattern of the anomaly. To him, it looked like weather patterns he'd seen in old Earth satellite photos. His hands moved gently, guiding rather than forcing, and the anomaly gradually resolved itself. The auditorium erupted in cheers. Professor Ion's plasma form swirled with excitement. "The winner is clear. Mark has demonstrated that there are many paths to scientific truth." Rex stood frozen, his crystalline form dulled with shock. But he didn't follow any of the rules. "No," Blue called out from the audience. "He followed the most important rule of all, understanding how the universe actually works, not just how we think it should work." Mark stepped down from his platform, feeling strange. He hadn't won because he was better than Rex. He'd won because he was different. And for the first time, being different felt exactly right. The week after Mark's victory over Rex brought big changes to the Galactic Academy. Professors began studying something they called the human factor, the unique way human minds connected seemingly unrelated patterns to solve complex problems. Mark sat in Professor Wave's advanced class, no longer at the back, but right in the front row. Today's lesson was about chaos theory, a subject that had been considered too unpredictable to be useful. "Watch carefully," Professor Wave said, creating a swirling mass of quantum particles. "Previously, we saw this as random chaos. But thanks to Mark's insights, we now understand these patterns are similar to what humans have observed in nature." The professor turned to Mark. "Would you explain how you see it?" Mark stood up, no longer afraid to share his thoughts. "It's like watching a flock of birds. They move together without any central control, following simple rules that create complex patterns. The quantum particles are doing the same thing. Around the classroom, students who once mocked him were now taking notes eagerly. Even Rex, who had grown quieter since the challenge, was paying close attention. Later that day, Mark found himself surrounded by classmates during lunch. They bombarded him with questions, not about Earth or humans, but about how he saw patterns in their various subjects. "The way you fixed the quantum core," one student said, her gaseous form swirling excitedly. "Could that help me understand plasma dynamics better?" Before Mark could answer, Professor Logic appeared at their table. "Mark, something unprecedented has happened. The Galactic Science Council has requested access to your problem-solving methods." The cafeteria fell silent. The council was the highest scientific authority in the galaxy. They had never shown interest in human sciences before. "They believe," Professor Logic continued, "that combining human intuitive pattern recognition with our advanced technology could lead to breakthroughs in dozens of fields. They're calling it quantum intuition theory." Blue, sitting nearby, glowed brightly. "See, what we thought was primitive was actually advanced. We just didn't understand it." That afternoon, Mark helped teach a special class. Students practiced combining their technological knowledge with human-style pattern recognition. Some struggled, too used to their old ways of thinking. But others began to see what Mark saw, the hidden connections that linked everything together. "It's like learning a new sense," one student exclaimed after successfully solving a problem using Mark's method. "We were so focused on the small details that we missed the bigger picture." At the end of the day, Professor Ion called Mark to their office, the plasma being seen to shimmer with excitement. "Mark, we've been reviewing all our teaching methods. For centuries, we thought our way was the only way. But you've shown us that true science isn't about following rules. It's about understanding patterns. The universe doesn't care about our formulas. It follows its own patterns, patterns that humans seem naturally equipped to see." Mark smiled, remembering how lost he'd felt when he first arrived at the academy. Sometimes the best way to understand something is to stop trying to control it and just watch how it flows. Professor Ion nodded, their plasma form rippling thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's the greatest lesson humans can teach us. Sometimes the most advanced science looks surprisingly simple, if you know how to see it." The Academy's warning sirens blared to life in the middle of the night. Mark woke to see Blue's crystalline form glowing with panic. "Emergency alert," the Academy's AI announced. "Massive spatial anomaly detected. All students report to the safety bunkers immediately." But Mark wasn't moving toward the bunkers. He stood at their room's window, staring at the strange distortion forming in the sky above the Academy. The stars were bending, twisting into impossible shapes. "Mark, we need to go," Blue urged. "No," Mark said quietly. "Look at the pattern. It's not random. It's breathing." Before Blue could respond, Professor Ion's voice came through the communication system. "All senior faculty to the observatory. Mark, we need you here too." In the observatory, chaos reigned. Professors rushed between monitoring stations while the spatial anomaly grew larger, threatening to engulf the entire academy. "Our containment fields are useless," Professor Logic reported, their metallic face showing rare signs of fear. "The anomaly is operating on principles we've never seen before." Professor Wave's energy form flickered anxiously. "If we can't stop it, it'll tear the academy apart." Mark stood at the main window, watching the swirling distortion. While others saw chaos, he saw something familiar. The way space twisted reminded him of something. "It's like a whirlpool," he whispered, then louder, "It's like a whirlpool in the ocean." The professors turned to him. Professor Ion moved closer. "Explain." "On Earth, when water flows meet, they can create whirlpools. They look chaotic, but they follow specific patterns. This anomaly, it's like two streams of space-time flowing into each other." Rex, who had stayed behind to help, spoke up. "But how does that help us? We can't just throw a stick into space to break up the flow." No, Mark said, an idea forming. But we can create a counterflow. Like how you can break up a whirlpool by creating another one next to it. Working quickly, Mark directed the Academy's energy systems to create controlled distortions around the anomaly. Many professors protested, saying it would only make things worse, but Professor Ion backed Mark's plan. Trust the human pattern recognition, the professor ordered. It hasn't failed us yet. The Academy's quantum core hummed as it generated precise spatial distortions according to Mark's instructions. For a tense moment, the anomaly grew even larger. But then, just as Mark predicted, the artificial distortions began disrupting its flow. It's working, Blue shouted, watching through his crystalline sensors. The anomaly is breaking up. Slowly but surely, the spatial distortion unraveled. The twisted stars straightened, and the night sky returned to normal. The Academy's structure creaked but held firm. As the emergency lights faded, Professor Logic turned to Mark. You risked everything on an analogy to Earth-water patterns. How could you be so sure it would work? Mark smiled tiredly. Because the universe loves patterns. Whether it's water, air, or space itself, the same basic patterns appear everywhere. Sometimes you just need to step back to see them. The professors exchanged meaningful looks. Once again, human intuition had seen connections their advanced technology had missed. The Academy was safe, but more importantly, another barrier between human and alien science had broken down. A month after the spatial anomaly incident, Mark stood before the Academy's Grand Council. The massive chamber was filled with representatives from every major scientific institution in the galaxy. They had come to witness something unprecedented, a complete reform of the Academy's teaching methods. Professor Ion floated at the podium, their plasma form glowing brightly. For centuries, we measured intelligence by how well students could follow established formulas. Today, we admit this was a mistake. Holographic displays lit up around the chamber, showing Mark's unique problem-solving patterns alongside traditional methods. The contrast was striking. Where standard approaches showed rigid, linear progressions, Mark's solutions flowed like rivers finding natural paths. Human cognitive patterns, which we once dismissed as primitive, have proven invaluable, Professor Logic added. They bridge gaps in our understanding that pure logic cannot cross. In the audience, Blue sat proudly as his former roommate's test scores were displayed, but now scored using new criteria that valued innovation and pattern recognition alongside traditional methods. Mark's ranking had shot from last place to among the top performers. Furthermore, Professor Wave announced, we have received applications from 57 human students hoping to join next year's class. The age of human-alien scientific collaboration has truly begun. Rex, sitting in the front row, stood up unexpectedly. His crystalline form sparkled as he addressed the council. I was wrong about humans. Their way of seeing patterns. It's not just different, it's essential. I propose we create a new department specifically for studying human cognitive approaches. Murmurs of agreement spread through the chamber. Professor Ion's form brightened. An excellent suggestion. And who better to lead this department than the student who opened our eyes to its importance? Mark felt hundreds of eyes and sensory organs turned toward him. A year ago, this attention would have terrified him. Now he stood confidently, knowing his different way of thinking was exactly what they needed. The Academy will now recognize multiple paths to scientific understanding, Professor Logic declared. All students will learn both traditional methods and human intuitive approaches. Our curriculum will be reformed accordingly. The chamber erupted in approval. Representatives from other academies crowded forward, eager to implement similar changes in their own institutions. Even some of the most traditional scientists were requesting access to human teaching methods. Later that evening, Mark sat with Blue in their favorite spot overlooking the Academy grounds. The quantum core pulsed with its new, more natural rhythm, a constant reminder of how human insight had changed everything. You know what's funny? Blue said, his crystalline form reflecting the setting sun. We thought we were teaching humans about advanced science, Turns out, humans were teaching us about the fundamental nature of the universe all along. Mark nodded, watching students of all species studying together in the courtyard below. Some were using traditional methods, others were trying human approaches, and many were creating new combinations of both. Maybe that's the biggest pattern of all, Mark replied. Progress doesn't come from everyone thinking the same way. It comes from bringing different ways of thinking together. Above them, the stars began appearing in the darkening sky, each one possibly hiding new patterns waiting to be discovered by minds that could see things differently. Years had passed since Mark first arrived at the Galactic Academy as its worst student. Now he stood at the front of the grand lecture hall, facing his own class of eager students, both alien and human. "Welcome to Advanced Pattern Recognition and Chaos Theory," he began, smiling at the diverse group before him, or as some still like to call it, the human approach. The lecture hall, once filled with rigid rows of seats, now had a more organic layout that encouraged group interaction. Holographic displays showed swirling patterns of quantum mechanics alongside images of Earth's natural phenomena: hurricanes, river systems, and flock movements. Blue, now a fellow professor, sat at the back of the hall, his crystalline form glowing with pride as he watched his former roommate teach. Next to him sat Rex, who had become one of the strongest advocates for combining traditional and human methods. "Today," Mark continued, "we're going to explore how the patterns you see in your everyday life connect to the deepest mysteries of quantum science." A student raised her hand. A young human girl. "Professor Mark, my traditional physics teacher says we still need to learn the old formulas. Why study patterns if we have exact calculations?" Mark smiled, remembering how he once asked similar questions. He pulled up a hologram of the Academy's quantum core, still running on the natural flow pattern he had discovered years ago. "Watch this," he said, manipulating the hologram. "When we forced the core to follow strict formulas, it fought against its natural patterns. But when we learned to see and work with those patterns, the hologram showed the core's energy flowing smoothly, more efficiently than ever. The formulas tell us what," he explained, "but the patterns show us why. We need both." The Academy had changed dramatically under this philosophy. The halls now buzzed with excited discussions as students from across the galaxy shared their unique perspectives. What had started in one classroom had spread to hundreds of institutions. After class, Mark walked through the Academy grounds with Blue and Rex. They passed the spot where Mark had once sat alone, feeling like a failure. Now students gathered there, humans and aliens together, teaching each other to see the universe through different eyes. The Galactic Science Council called again, Rex said, his crystalline form twinkling. 3 more major discoveries this month using combined human-alien approaches. They're calling it a new golden age of science. And to think, Blue added, it all started because one human student was brave enough to be different. Mark stopped at a window, looking out at the stars. A new group of human students would arrive next week, no longer afraid of being the worst in their class. They would bring their own unique ways of seeing patterns, adding to the growing web of understanding. "We never needed to be the best at the old way of doing things," Mark said quietly. "We just needed to be ourselves. The universe has endless patterns to discover and endless ways to discover them." As the 3 professors walked on, the Academy's quantum core pulsed steadily behind them, its energy flowing in perfect harmony, a constant reminder that sometimes the most advanced science comes from simply seeing the world through different eyes. The end.